Hello there, weary traveller, and welcome to this cozy corner of history. Before we embark on our journey back to the harsh winters of medieval times, I wanted to extend a warm greeting to you, dear listener. Whether you're snuggled under the covers, ready to drift off to sleep, or simply seeking some peaceful historical storytelling, I'm delighted that you've chosen to join me tonight. If you don't mind, I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from and what time of day it is for you right now. Feel free to leave a comment and let me know. It's always a pleasure to see the diverse community of history enthusiasts gathered here, and if you enjoy this style of calm, immersive tales from the past, please don't hesitate to click that subscribe button so you won't miss the next installment. But for now, let's allow the stresses of the modern world to melt away as we journey back in time to a period long ago when winter's icy grip held far more peril than most of us can imagine. A time when the changing of the seasons brought not just inconvenience, but genuine fear for survival. Imagine yourself in the countryside of medieval Europe. The last leaves have long since fallen from the trees, and the sun hangs low on the horizon, its feeble rays doing little to warm the biting chill in the air. Frosty fields crunch underfoot as a gentle breeze carries the first few flurries of snow. Winter is approaching, and for the people of this era, that means one thing above all: hardship. The cold seeps in gradually at first, but it will persist for long months to come. The landscape will soon be blanketed in white, and the rivers and ponds will freeze over into gleaming sheets of ice. In a time before central heating and well-insulated homes, the promise of warmth is a distant dream for all but the wealthiest. But of course, it wasn't always like this. Medieval winters were not always so brutal and unforgiving. There was a time when the seasons passed in a more predictable rhythm, and the arrival of snow was met with acceptance rather than dread. But then something remarkable occurred. The climate itself began to undergo a shift, ushering in a period that would later be known as the Little Ice Age. Spanning from the 14th century until the 19th century, this era witnessed colder temperatures and harsher winters than anyone could recall. The precise reasons behind this change remain elusive, but its impact was felt throughout the land. Crops failed, livestock perished, and the icy winds intensified. One of the most renowned instances of the Little Ice Age's wrath was the Great Frost of 1709. That winter, temperatures plummeted to such an extent that rivers and lakes froze solid. In London, the river temperatures transformed into a frozen highway, with people setting up shops and even lighting fires directly on the ice. It was a surreal spectacle. Yet it came at a steep cost. Numerous lives were lost that year as people huddled in their homes, while the world outside turned into an icy expanse. Amidst this suffering, there were individuals who found an unusual sense of solace in the frigid weather. One such person was a young Isaac Newton, who was then a student at the University of Cambridge. When the Great Frost struck, Newton was compelled to return home to his family's farm. There, by the fire, he found himself with ample time to contemplate the mysteries of the universe. It was during this unexpected respite that Newton began to develop some of his most groundbreaking ideas, laying the groundwork for his theories on calculus and optics. Who knows what other brilliant minds might have been inspired to greatness by the quiet isolation of a prolonged and frigid winter. It serves as a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit possesses an innate ability to seek out the light. However, for the vast majority of people during medieval times, winter was a season to endure rather than relish. The wealthy could afford thick woolen clothing, ample firewood, and well-stocked ladders to help them navigate the challenging months. In contrast, the peasants and serfs, who constituted the majority of the population, faced a very different reality. Imagine waking up each morning in a one-room cottage, the air thick with smoke from the sputtering fire. Your breath mists in front of you as you rise from your straw mattress, careful not to disturb the shivering forms of your family members huddled around you for warmth. The cold seeps in through every crack and crevice, numbing your fingers and toes until they ache. If you're lucky, breakfast might consist of a meager bowl of porridge or some stale bread. The food from the previous harvest is dwindling, and you know that the long winter months will only bring more scarcity. The livestock, too, are suffering. Their coats matted with frost as they huddle together in the barn, their breath steaming in the icy air. As the day wears on, you trudge out into the snow to gather firewood. It's back-breaking work, and your hands quickly become raw and chapped from the cold. But you know that without a fire, your family will not survive the night. You think of your children, their small faces pinched with hunger and cold, and you press on. This was the reality for so many in medieval times. A constant battle against the elements, a fight for survival that consumed every waking hour. Yet, even in the face of such hardship, there were moments of resilience and even joy to be found. The medieval world was deeply attuned to the rhythms of nature. The passing of the seasons was marked not just by changes in the weather, but by a rich tapestry of rituals and celebrations. And so, even in the depths of winter, there were glimmers of light to be found. One such beacon was the Mid-Winter Feast of St. Stephen, held each year on December 26th. For a brief moment, the rigid social hierarchies of medieval society were turned on their head. A peasant or serf was crowned the lord of misrule for the day. This lucky individual would preside over a raucous celebration filled with food, drink, and reel. A rare moment of indulgence in an otherwise austere existence. But perhaps the most enduring symbol of hope during the medieval winter was the simple act of coming together. In a world where survival often depended on the strength of one's community, the bonds of family and friendship took on immense significance. Imagine, if you will, a small village huddled against the snow. The smoke from the chimneys mingled with the leaden sky, a testament to life amidst the barren landscape. Inside the homes, families gathered around the hearth, sharing stories and exchanging the meager scraps of food they had. There was a palpable sense of unity, a shared purpose in the face of hardship. Neighbors trudged through the snow to check on each other, bringing extra firewood or a pot of stew to those in need. In the flickering firelight, faces were lined with weariness, yet also with a quiet determination. They had weathered winters past and were confident that they would endure this one as well. And so the long cold months continued, the snow piling higher and the ice growing thicker with each passing day. But even in the darkest depths of winter, a glimmer of hope emerged on the horizon. For the people of medieval times understood that no matter how brutal the season, spring would inevitably return. They diligently watched for the first signs, the slight lengthening of the days and the softening of the earth beneath the snow. And when at last the thaw began, it was celebrated with a joy and reverence that we can scarcely comprehend today. Plough Monday marked the official end of the winter season, a day when work in the fields could commence anew. The ploughs that had lain idle for so long were brought out and blessed in elaborate ceremonies, symbolizing the renewed cycle of life. As the first furrows were cut into the earth, there was a palpable sense of relief and gratitude in the air. Life had been challenging, yes, bitterly so at times, but they had persevered. Through the long, dark winter, the people of medieval Europe clung to the promise of spring. Despite hunger, cold, and uncertainty, they held fast to this hope. As the land thawed and green shoots emerged, the promise was fulfilled. This resilience is hard to comprehend in our modern world of convenience and comfort. Facing relentless hardship year after year is almost unimaginable. Yet there's something profoundly humbling in knowing our ancestors endured such challenges. They confronted the harsh realities of their world with remarkable strength and fortitude. They found hope in the darkest times and joy in the simplest things. Their legacy of resilience echoes through the ages. So, the next time you shiver on a cold winter's day, remember those who came before, recall their struggles and triumphs, their sorrow and joy. Above all, remember the unbreakable human spirit that carried them through even the harshest winters. That's perhaps the greatest lesson from medieval Europe. No matter how dark the night or how cold the wind, spring's promise always awaits. And with that, dear listener, we conclude our journey through the brutal winters of medieval Europe. I hope these tales of hardship and resilience have offered a fresh perspective on your own experiences of the season. May you always find warmth and comfort in family and community, just as our ancestors did. May the promise of spring guide you through even the coldest nights. Thank you for joining me on this cozy corner of history. If you enjoyed our time together, I'd love for you to subscribe and share these stories with a friend. There are many more fascinating tales to explore together, but for now, I bid you a warm and restful good night. Stay safe and keep warm. I'll see you next time for another journey into the past. Sweet dreams. As the brutal conditions of winter tightened their icy grip on medieval society, Even the most privileged were not spared from the season's merciless onslaught. In drafty primitive castles ill-equipped for the harshest months, royal households faced a formidable challenge in staving off the biting cold and ensuring the court was adequately provisioned. Maintaining a royal residence during winter was nothing short of staggering. Massive quantities of firewood needed to be stockpiled to fuel the roaring hearths that provided the sole source of heat. The kitchen staff toiled ceaselessly to preserve meats, grains, and vegetables that would sustain the court through the long, lean months when fresh, fair produce was scarce. Servitors scrambled to seal every crack and gap to keep out the insidious chill. However, even the most diligent preparations often proved insufficient against winter's relentless assault. In one particularly chilling tale, a medieval queen is said to have tragically perished from exposure within her own palace walls. According to chroniclers, Queen Elizabeth of Hungary was found frozen in her bed one bitter January morning in 1326, a victim of the very castle that was meant to be her refuge. As grim fates like these demonstrated, the spectre of death cast its ominous paw over the medieval world during winter's dark depths. Yet, even amidst such bleakness, the indomitable human spirit endured and found cause to rekindle hope. For much of the populace, that faint glimmer came in the form of the Feast of St. Stephen, a cherished midwinter celebration falling on December 26th. This day marked a brief respite from the unending drudgery and privation of peasant life, a rare sanctioned opportunity for real indulgence. Central to the feast was the tradition of misrule, a ceremonial inversion of the normal social order. For a single day, a commoner would be appointed the Lord of Misrule, granted temporary authority to preside over the merment and issue playful edicts to his betters. Although fleeting, this act of satin license provided a crucial pressure valve for the simmering tensions and resentments fueled by the oppressive feudal hierarchy. The rigid lines between lord and vassal blurred for one mirthful day, where all could partake as equals in feasting, gaming, and carousing. The sense of community fostered by such celebrations transcended mere diversion. It served as a critical survival mechanism, with winter's cruelty threatening to break both body and spirit. The bonds of fellowship and goodwill forged during the Feast of Stephen and similar revelries helped sustain the populace through the leanest times. One chronicle from 1377 recounts the poignant tale of two peasant families, neighbors whose meager winter stores had been exhausted long before spring's arrival. On the brink of perishing from hunger, they pooled their last tattered resources to share a humble meal on the Feast of St. Stephen. That gesture of generosity and unity gave them the strength to endure the season's remaining hardships. Such acts of compassion formed the very essence of medieval society during winter, when a helping hand extended to a frostbitten traveler or an extra log given to a shivering widow could spell the difference between life and death. The grim shared purpose of weathering winter's onslaught together shaped a culture of interdependence that defied the era's often ruthless stratification. However, even the warmest expressions of conviviality and fellow feeling inevitably cooled as winter's unrelenting misery stretched on interminably. The Feast of Stephen was but a small flare of light and levity amidst the frozen darkness, a momentary reprieve before the bleak slog of January, February, and March. As stores dwindled, bellies hungered, and the cold crept past the most assiduously stoked hearth, the faint promise of distant spring seemed to fade into impossibility. Yet year after arduous year, medieval society endured against all odds. Through unimaginable adversity and hardship, they clung to existence, upheld by the grit, fortitude, and fellowship forged in winter's unsparing crucible. As the land lay dormant and the sun retreated, they somehow found within themselves the tenacity to carry on. One can only imagine the flood of profound relief and joy that greeted the first tentative signs of winter's passing. The slight softening of the frigid air, the incremental lengthening of daylight, and the hopeful drip of icicles yielding to the sun's strengthening rays. After months of unremitting struggle, the sight of the season's initial lost battles against the forces of light and life must have seemed nothing short of miraculous. For the battle-weary tillers of the earth, no day was more welcome than Plough Monday, the traditional start of the agricultural year. Falling on the first Monday after Epiphany in early January, it heralded the ground's imminent thawing and reawakening. Though the deepest rigors of winter had yet to fully release their stranglehold, the ritual preparations of Plough Monday offered a tangible talisman of hope, an assurance of winter's inevitable loosening and spring's return. One can picture a patchwork of furrowed fields slowly emerging from the receding snows and frosts, the newly harnessed draft teams leaning into the first tentative overturning of the frigid clouds. With each sod upended to greet the strengthening sun, medieval man dealt another blow to winter's retreating sovereignty and proclaimed his dogged persistence in the face of nature's caprice. In the modern world, with our central heat and electric blankets, our well-towed larders, and resilient infrastructure, we can scarcely fathom the immense fortitude required to endure the unremitting brutality of a medieval winter. If the season's impositions seem daunting from our cozy, temperature-controlled bubbles, how incomprehensible must true winter suffering have been? Yet when we grumble about minor inconveniences like delayed flights or rain-snarled commutes, let us reflect on the unyielding misery endured by our forebears during those interminable frozen months. What reserves of resilience and tenacity did they muster year after arduous year simply to survive? Their ability to find moments of celebration and fellowship amidst such unrelenting privation seems nearly superhuman to modern sensibilities. That they not only endured winter's ravages but managed to find slivers of light in the all-encompassing darkness is a testament to the indomitable spirit within us all, waiting to be awakened by hardship's clarion call. So the next time our modern discontents start to chafe, let us remember the icy plights of our predecessors. In remembrance of those who came before, let us seize the opportunity to tap into our own dormant reserves of grit and forbearance. As we nestle gratefully into our warm beds, let us spare a thought for all those who fought winter's bitter siege, armed only with the weapons of will, fellowship, and undying hope. As the new year dawned and Plough Monday festivities faded into memory, medieval life settled back into its familiar winter rhythm. Short, frigid days and long, frosty nights characterized the season. The fortunate sought refuge in the meager warmth of smoky hovels and draughty manors. For the less privileged, winter meant a constant battle against the elements just to survive. One of the greatest winter hardships was the ever-present threat of sickness. In the cramped and unsanitary living conditions of the time, disease could spread rapidly. The common cold was an uncommon misery, leaving sufferers with a red nose and blurred vision. Winter was a season fraught with peril, as far more serious illnesses plagued the populace. Influenza, a formidable adversary, struck down both young and old with its characteristic fever, chills, and aches. In an era devoid of vaccines and effective treatments, flu outbreaks could decimate entire communities. The winter of 1557 stands out as particularly brutal, with a virulent strain of influenza ravaging across Europe. In Paris alone, over 10,000 lives were lost. Pneumonia, another stealthy killer, preyed on those weakened by hunger or other ailments. The winter dampness seeped into the lungs, causing them to fill with fluid until the victim essentially drowned. Crowded living spaces provided the perfect breeding ground for pneumonia to spread rapidly. It was not uncommon for multiple members of the same family to succumb, leaving behind orphan children and shattered lives. Even royalty was not spared the ravages of winter sickness. In fact, disease often spread even more swiftly in castles and courts due to the constant flow of people in and out. A visiting dignitary or pilgrim might unknowingly bring pestilence along with their entourage. Henry VIII lost his beloved wife, Jane Seymour, to postnatal complications likely exacerbated by the poor hygienic practices of the age. Children were perhaps the most vulnerable of all. Harsh weather, meager rations, and unsanitary conditions combined to make winter a truly perilous time for the young. Infants born in the cold months faced an especially precarious start to life. In London during the 1500s, it was not uncommon for fully half of all children to not survive to see their 5th birthday. One poignant practice of the age speaks volumes. The custom of bone lace involved tying a black ribbon to the hand of a seriously ill infant. Should the child pass away, this ribbon could then be used to secure their burial shroud, a somber reminder of winter's deadly toll on the most innocent. With danger lurking both outside the home and within, Winter was a time to batten down the hatches and pray for survival. For those with limited means, even the basic necessities of shelter, food, and warmth were not guaranteed. The relentless grip of winter poverty was harsh and unforgiving. Firewood, a precious commodity, was subject to strict laws governing its gathering from forests. A peasant family might huddle around a makeshift fire of dried dung and straw, desperately trying to generate some feeble warmth. Shivering livestock shared the limited heat, their breath visible in the frigid air. Food supplies dwindled to a meager subsistence of salted meat, dried peas, and coarse bread. The autumn harvest bounty was a distant memory, and the first signs of spring were still months away. Foraging for winter nutrients meant scouring the stark landscape for hardy fare, like nettles, garlic, and mushrooms. The scarcity of fresh vegetables in winter made for some rather dreary dinner pots. A typical pottage might contain peas, beans, salted pork, and if fortunate, some foraged greens and wild onions for flavor. While tasteless and tedious, it was enough to sustain body and soul until spring. For many, even this unappealing monotony was an unattainable luxury. Storms, droughts, pests, and other calamities could obliterate food stores, plunging entire regions into crisis. The Great Famine of 1315 stands out as a particularly harrowing time, caused by relentlessly heavy rains that rotted crops in the fields across northern Europe. Contemporary accounts paint a chilling picture of desperate people reduced to eating dogs, horses, and even human flesh in their hunger. Parents were said to have smothered their starving children as an act of mercy. Corpses littered the streets and fields in such abundance that proper burial was impossible. Although this famine was remarkable for its severity and scale, localized crop failures and food shortages were an ever-present threat. A medieval winter diet walked a precarious line between subsistence and starvation, a time of hunkering down with the knowledge that things would likely worsen before they improved. Winter, beyond its basic survival implications, profoundly impacted every aspect of medieval culture. Leisure, religious worship, and even crime and punishment were all distinctly marked by the season. The relentless drudgery of surviving in the biting cold permeated every facet of life. Socially, winter fostered a sense of togetherness and reliance on family and community bonds. The lively gatherings around the Yule log gave way to more subdued pursuits. With travel perilous and daylight scarce, people sought amusement and enrichment within their own homes during the long, dark evenings. Storytelling and singing became popular pastimes to pass the time. The flickering light of rush lights or tallow candles illuminated scenes of sewing, weaving, and whittling. Recognizing idle hands as a potential temptation, industriousness became more of a necessity than a virtue. Winter's confinement provided ample time for such gainful activities. For the literate, winter offered a chance to indulge in reading, although this was a relatively exclusive pursuit. In England, at the close of the 15th century, a modest tradesman's library might contain a Bible, a book of hours, and perhaps some merry tales or stories of Robin Hood. Only the wealthy could afford the lavishly illuminated volumes that were highly prized by bibliophiles. Those who could read often did so aloud for the benefit and entertainment of the entire household. Winter was a time for sharing cherished stories of valiant knights, cunning tricksters, and star-crossed lovers. The chivalric adventures of King Arthur and his court were perennial favorites. Their intricate plots and noble themes transported listeners far beyond the confines of their winter refuge. Less wholesome entertainments also provided a welcome respite from the monotony of winter days. Gambling with dice was a popular pastime, often leading to heated arguments and empty pockets. The clatter of knucklebones and the rattle of dice echoed through many a tavern and grand hall as fortunes were won and lost. Drink was another common winter diversion. The fermented comforts of ale, mead, and wine, along with the warmth of the hearth, helped boost both body temperature and spirits. Public houses thrived during this time, offering fellowship, entertainment, and a respite from the biting cold. Inebriation often led to loosened tongues and lowered inhibitions, sparking lively debates, boisterous songs, and occasionally even a brawl or two. The short, dark days of winter also provided an opportunity for quiet reflection and spiritual contemplation. The church held immense sway in the medieval mind, and winter was a time for drawing closer to God. With agricultural work at a standstill, more time could be devoted to prayer, penance, and acts of kindness. The traditional nativity plays and pageants of Christmas gave way to more somber devotions. As winter deepened, the pious might embark on pilgrimages to holy sites, braving the harsh conditions as a testament to their commitment and devotion. Others spent hours in hushed churches, fingering rosary beads numb with cold and meditating on their eternal soul. Charity was also a significant winter value, with almsgiving considered a Christian duty. The 7 acts of corporal mercy laid out a blueprint for generosity, encompassing feeding the hungry, giving drink to the thirsty, sheltering the homeless, clothing the naked, visiting prisoners, comforting the sick, and burying the dead. In a season of scarcity and hardship, small gestures of human kindness could make all the difference. However, winter's harshness sometimes revealed the darker aspects of human nature as well. Crime tended to rise as desperation set in, and opportunities for theft increased. With people spending more time indoors in close quarters, tempers often frayed, leading to a spike in assaults and other violent crimes. The medieval justice system was ill-equipped to handle this seasonal surge in lawlessness. Trials were often delayed until the weather improved, leaving the accused to languish in damp and overcrowded jails. Punishments could be severe, ranging from fines and floggings to even executions meted out to those found guilty. Even amidst winter's bleak realities, the indomitable human spirit persevered. People found small joys and moments of levity whenever possible. The distant promise of spring sustained them through the darkest and coldest nights. The lengthening days of February brought a welcome reprieve, marked by the feast of St. Valentine on the 14th. This ancient pagan fertility, later Christianized into a celebration of love, was enthusiastically embraced by the people of the Middle Ages. It was a bright spot of warmth and tenderness in the very heart of winter's depths. By the 15th century, the custom of drawing names for Valentine's sweethearts had become well established. Eligible ladies and lads would gather to draw slips of paper from a bowl, sealing their romantic fate for the next year. These annual pairings often led to merry flirtations and sometimes even marriages. Flowers, sweets, and sentimental verses were common tokens of affection exchanged between Valentine's sweethearts. The simple act of receiving a handmade card from an admirer could set hearts aflutter. Even in the chilliest weather, winter, despite its woes, could not extinguish the fires of love. As the feast of St. Valentine passed into Lent, the austerities of the season intensified. However, there was a sense that the worst was now behind them, and brighter days lay ahead. The snowdrops and crocuses poking their fragile heads through the frost offered tangible evidence that winter's icy reign was finally weakening. Throughout the Middle Ages, the relentless cycle of the seasons shaped every aspect of life, and no season left a more profound mark than winter. It was a time of privation and hardship when mere survival was an achievement. Yet it was also a time of resilience and quiet fortitude in the face of the harshest of elements. Medieval winter was a test of the human spirit, a proving ground for the values of faith, family, and community. The winking icicles, frosty meadows, and Longau fields may have appeared postcard perfect, but the realities of the season were anything but picturesque. However, this crucible of snow, ice, and scarcity also forged a people of remarkable grit and endurance. The Middle Ages were built on the backs of those who could withstand the harshest winters and still find reason to hope for spring. There is perhaps no greater tribute to their stubborn vitality. So, the next time you find yourself lamenting a delayed train or a slushy sidewalk, spare a thought for your medieval ancestors. Unequipped with thermal socks, central heating, or weather apps, they faced each winter as a battle to be fought with every resource at their disposal. And they emerged victorious spring after spring. We are the heirs and beneficiaries of their tenacity and unbreakable spirit. And with that, I will leave you to your warm bed and electric blanket, secure in the knowledge that winter has been largely tamed. Thanks in no small part to those who came before and showed us how to endure. May your dreams be filled with gentle snowfalls and cozy hearths. And may you wake to a world where winter is more a friend than a foe. As the feeble winter sun struggled to pierce the thick grey clouds, the people of medieval Europe shivered and drew their meagre cloaks tighter around their shoulders. The icy tendrils of winter's grip seemed to seep into their very bones, chilling them to the core. For the poorest peasants, the cruel irony was that their ragged woolen garments, which felt oppressively hot and sticky during the sweltering summer labors, now offered scarcely more warmth than a gossamer veil against winter's biting onslaught. They huddled together in their hovels, grateful for the meager heat emanating from a smoky fire, their breath misting in the chilly air. Even the animals felt the bite of winter. The elderly draft horse, ribs protruding beneath its shaggy coat, dreamt wistfully of the lush summer grass that had long gone. As it munched on its allotted wisp of hay, the milk cow lowed mournfully, its petite chapped lips and roar echoing in the frigid draughts that pierced through the barn walls. Even the usually haughty barn cats seemed a bit less dignified, their usual disdain softened by the gnawing hunger in their bellies and the frost on their whiskers. Yes, winter was an exceptionally challenging time for the lowest rungs of medieval society. Even the nobility, sheltered in their grand draughty castles, were not immune to the season's deprivations. Many a blue-blooded maiden wailed in despair as her priceless silk gowns proved inadequate against the damp chill of stone walls. The castle kitchens worked tirelessly to prepare enough piping hot delicacies to warm the noble innards. It is said that King Henry II of England succumbed to a severe case of the winter shivers and once burned an entire chair just to warm his royal posterior for a fleeting moment. His servants were in despair, knowing that His Majesty's temper was liable to flare up even faster than the furniture if he remained uncomfortably cold for too long. However, for peasant and king alike, winter seemed to drag on interminably, an unrelenting slog of frozen misery. The only respite came from the occasional celebration or feast day. These brief islands of light and levity were cherished like a drowning man gasping for air. Perhaps the most eagerly anticipated was the Feast of St. Stephen on December 26th, a day of unrestrained merriment and delightfully subversive reversals of fortune. By ancient tradition, a mere peasant was crowned the Lord of Misrule on this day, gleefully lording over his bets in a delightful act of sanctioned rebellion. One can only imagine the thunderous peals of laughter that reverberated as the lowest serf commanded the local baron with mock imperiousness. For a glorious day, the ordinary rules and hierarchies vanished, and everyone revelled together as equals. The harsh drudgery of winter seemed to recede, driven back by the radiant glow of communal joy. However, the merry festivities would soon come to an end. The misrule would be written, and the cold, harsh reality of winter would descend once more. The people would trudge back to their hearths and their chores, the biting wind mocking the fleeting warmth of fellowship. The battle against winter's grim siege resumed unabated. Yet even in the bleakest depths of winter, there were quiet acts of courage and compassion that melted the frost from even the most weary hearts. Neighbors shared scarce provisions with those even less fortunate, demonstrating a generosity of spirit that no cold could diminish. A certain Dame Matilda of York was said to have once given her only cloak to a poor beggar woman, shivering herself through the long walk home. When questioned about her decision to relinquish her sole defense against the brutal cold, she simply smiled serenely and said, "The warmth of human kindness is a fire that never goes out." Such selflessness and nobility of spirit were the secret weapons with which the medieval people armed themselves against winter's relentless onslaught. Although winter could freeze their fingers and toes, it could not touch the invincible summer that reigned eternal in their hearts. And so they endured, persisted, and triumphed in their own unique way over the harshest of seasons. The first green buds of spring were more than just a welcome sight. They were a living testament to the tenacity of the human will, the indomitable spirit that could outlast any winter, no matter how dark or cold. As we snuggled deeper under our cozy electric blankets, perhaps we would do well to remember the trials and triumphs of our medieval forebears. Amidst their relentless struggle against the elements and their unwavering refusal to succumb to nature's capricious fury, they forged an enduring legacy of resilience that continues to warm our hearts even today. Even as the biting chill of winter persists outside our windows, we draw strength from the knowledge that they braved the brutal cold with nothing but a cloak and their indomitable human spirit. Surely we can endure until the arrival of spring. Spring at last. As the icy grip of winter gradually loosened, medieval folk eagerly anticipated the return of more pleasant weather. They had endured months of bitter cold, huddling in cramped quarters, and their stomachs growling from meager winter rations. But now, as the sun lingered a bit longer in the sky each day, glinting off the melting snow, there was cause for celebration. Across the land, people emerged from their winter cocoons, blinking in the bright spring light. Bears emerged from hibernation, and children burst out of their homes, delighting in the refreshing breeze on their faces instead of the piercing bite of winter wind. With giddy laughter, they ran through the squelching mud, marveling at the first brave crocuses pushing their petals through the thawing ground. In the fields, farmers eagerly awaited Plough Monday, the traditional beginning of the agricultural year. Occurring on the first Monday after Epiphany, it marked the moment when the ground had softened enough for ploughing to commence. Draft horses and oxen would be hitched to ploughs and paraded through the village streets, adorned with garlands and vibrant ribbons. Church bells rang joyously as the procession passed, heralding a festive start to the growing season ahead. There was a palpable sense of relief as chimneys puffed with smoke once more. No longer suffocated by snow and ice, the threat of frostbite and illness receded along with the snowbanks. Faces that had been creased with care from the stresses of winter survival now crinkled into hopeful smiles instead. Soon the vibrant produce of spring and summer would replace the bland, preserved Gruyère air and hard cheese that had barely sustained them through the long, dark months. It's hard for us to imagine from our modern perspective just how significant this seasonal shift was. We may grumble about slushy roads or groan at losing an hour of sleep to daylight savings time, but for our medieval ancestors, the arrival of spring was nothing short of life-affirming. It meant they had weathered winter's brutal assault, staving off starvation and sickness for another year. The skeletal trees once again cloaked themselves in green, an outward reflection of the inner regrowth and renewal. Medieval people felt the warmth and light returning. Some of that elation can still be heard echoing through the ages in lively medieval folk tunes and verses that welcome spring's sweet return. One English song, jaunty and full of life, proclaimed, "Lude sing cuckoo groweth, said, and bloweth med, and springeth the woo new sing cuckoo." This roughly translates to, "Loudly sing cuckoo, it grows and blows mud, and springeth the new cuckoo." The seed is growing, the meadow is blooming, and the wood is springing up. The sheer irrepressible joy is palpable, spilling out in simple yet evocative rhyme. So, let us take a moment to appreciate the immense fortitude, resilience, and zest for life embodied by our medieval ancestors. Through the harshest conditions imaginable, they endured, making it through each winter by the grit of their teeth and the bonds of their communities. And when spring sun and birdsong finally broke winter's oppressive silence, they reveled wholeheartedly, knowing they had once again triumphed over nature's cruelty. As we nestle into our warm beds, perhaps grumbling half-heartedly about the chill outside our windows, we might spare a thought for those long-ago souls. The ones who would heave a sigh of pure relief as the snow gave way to mud, flinging open their shutters and letting the spring air rush in. The ones who met winter's brutality with unwavering tenacity and an exuberant will to live should humble us to this day. Let their strength serve as a reminder when we face our own bleak seasons, whether they are literal or metaphorical. If they could emerge from the depths of winter privation with such unabashed joy, then surely we too can find wellsprings of hope to sustain us. The thaw will come, the sun will return, and we will step out once more into the light. Voices joined in a resounding chorus of LWD Sing Cuckoo. The blizzards and bitter frosts continued to torment the land, but medieval folk possessed a stubborn resilience. Even in the darkest depths of winter, they found ways to help each other weather the storm. Neighbors shared their meager food, taking turns hosting communal meals. Villages assigned young men to check on elderly widows, bringing them firewood and repairing their ramshackle huts. One such widow was Agnes, an old woman with no family to care for her. Her bones ached fiercely in the cold, and her hands trembled as she tried to kindle a fire, but it was no use. She had nearly given up hope when there was a knock at her door. It was Tom, a strapping village lad, his cheeks ruddy from the biting wind. He brought not only an armful of logs, but also a sack of dried peas and a hunch of salted pork donated by other villagers. Tears of gratitude streamed down Agnes's wrinkled face as Tom stoked a roaring blaze in her hearth. For the first time in weeks, warmth seeped back into her frail body. Such acts of generosity were common during these lean times. Even the wealthy and even the nobility were not exempt from compassion. Lady Margaret, wife of the local earl, was known for her charity during winter months. Although her castle larders were well stocked, she insisted on sending wagons of grains and preserved foodstuffs to the poorest peasants in her husband's domain. Some of her high-born peers scoffed at this, viewing the peasantry as hardly better than the livestock. Why waste good food on them? Lady Margaret, steadfast in her Christian duty to care for the less fortunate, faced a severe famine during a particular winter. Determined to stretch the castle provisions, she ordered the cooks to prepare hearty soups and stews to feed the starving poor who came begging at the gates. The kitchen boys grumbled at the extra work, but the cook, Bernard, a portly fellow, shared his mistress's sense of noblesse oblige. He threw himself into the task, utilizing every last turnip and potato from the cellar to bulk up the soup. The ravenous peasants gratefully slurped it down, oblivious to the gristly bits of mutton floating in the broth. For some, it would be their only meal for days. As winter dragged on, even Lady Margaret's coffers began to dwindle. To secure more supplies, she discreetly sold some of her jewels and finery to neighboring towns. Her husband, the Earl, chose to overlook her actions, respecting her piety, even as he worried it might leave them vulnerable during lean times. The Church also played a crucial role in aiding the suffering. Monasteries opened their doors to the poor and infirm, providing them with a warm pallet of straw for sleeping and a basic daily meal of bread and ale. Some even established primitive hospitals to nurse the frostbitten and desperately ill. The monks saw it as their holy duty, a way to emulate the selfless compassion of Christ. Brother William, a young novice tasked with tending to the sick at his monastery's hospital, was initially repulsed by the sights and smells of disease and decay. However, he forced himself to ladle broth into the mouths of toothless elders and change the pus-soaked bandages of weeping sores. He prayed fervently for the strength to endure this trial and sought divine protection from the worst ravages of winter. Winter, the great equalizer, laid low both the rich and the poor with its icy scythe, while the wealthy could afford thicker woolen hose and luxuries like hot mulled wine. The hardships of winter were felt by all, but they still shivered in their draughty homes and worried about their dwindling stores. Even death came for them, in the form of winter-borne diseases. Lady Isabel, a noblewoman, was heavily pregnant during a particularly harsh cold snap. She was confined to her chamber, where she had every comfort imaginable, a crackling hearth, mounds of furs, and attentive maids to cater to her every need. However, contagion had a way of sneaking past even the thickest castle walls. A kitchen girl with a hacking cough brought Lady Isabel a warm milk and herb concoction. Within days, the expectant mother was burning with fever and her lungs were rattling. The child came too soon, a tiny, lifeless wisp that never drew breath. By the end of the week, Lady Isabel had also passed away. The king himself was not immune to the suffering of his subjects during the dreadful winter of 1433. Henry V, a pious and gentle soul, was consumed by worry over the plight of his people. The royal physicians prescribed him a tonic of cinnamon and ginger to ward off the cold humours, but he still sank into a deep melancholy, unable to warm his hands even when thrust into the roaring hearth. Some whispered that it was God's punishment for Henry's weakness as a ruler. In truth, seasonal depression was an affliction that could strike anyone, from the mightiest king to the lowest peasant. As the days slowly began to lengthen and the tight grip of winter finally loosened, people allowed themselves to dream of spring. They prayed for the land to thaw and for the first tentative buds to appear on the skeletal trees. The great wheel of the farming year could begin to turn once more. In the earliest days of spring, on the first Monday after Epiphany, medieval people celebrated Plough Monday. This was when the first symbolic furrow would be cut into the frost-covered earth, a hopeful omen of the crops to come. Village men blackened their faces with soot for luck and paraded through the muddy lanes with their ploughshares held high, singing hearty songs to awaken the slumbering soil. Afterward there was dancing, hearty food, and much quaffing of ale. It was a promise, a covenant that the dark days of winter were passing and brighter tomorrows lay ahead. This same eternal cycle played out at all levels of society. In the grand halls of dukes and countesses, minstrels played merry tunes, and couples leaped into lively carol dances, brimming with the optimism of a new year. The king hosted a lavish feast for his court, with tables heaped with delicacies like roast swan and March pane sweets. Even the lowly peasant Giles and his family felt a weight lift from their shoulders as they ventured out to their humble plot. Giles clutched the pouch of precious saved seed, which meant a future of full bellies. The wretched widow Agnes, who had been on the brink of death, found herself stirring a bubbling pot of pottage, humming tunelessly. She had endured winter's gauntlet and witnessed another spring dawn. Praise be to God. Winter was brutal, and there was no escaping that fact. It brought with it a host of miseries and hardships, from hunger to bone-chilling cold to the constant spectre of death and disease. However, it was also a time when the true resilience and communal spirit of medieval people shone through. Staring into the abyss of winter's bleakness, they responded with generosity, grit, and even defiant celebration. They understood that winter was an inescapable part of the great cycle of life, and the best way to conquer the cold was to hunker down and endure it together. So, as you huddle beneath your cozy duvet, perhaps grumbling about the exorbitant heating bill or scraping a bit of frost from your windshield, spare a thought for your medieval ancestors. Reflect on how they survived winter after winter in a world before electric blankets, central heating, and grocery deliveries at the click of a button. Though our modern winter woes may seem all-consuming in the moment, they pale in comparison to what medievals faced each year. And perhaps we could learn a lesson from them. That empathy, charity, and an unwavering hope for spring are the best ways to endure life's hardships. Whether it's a polar vortex or a pandemic, let's all embrace the coming spring with a full and grateful heart, knowing that even the deepest snowdrifts will eventually yield to the warming sun. The harshness of winter only makes the blossoming of spring all the sweeter. As a medieval king might say, let us brave winter so that we may spring eternally. Frost crackles underfoot as you trudge through snowdrifts, your breath clouding in the icy air. Icicles glitter in the pale sunlight hanging from the eaves of well and daub huts. The village lies hushed and still, huddled against winter's onslaught. This is what winter looked like for most of our medieval ancestors. Not the cozy scenes we imagine of merry feasts in snug castles, adorned with holly and filled with music and laughter. No, for the vast majority, winter was a time of bone-chilling cold, dire hunger, and grim survival. The spectre of winter hunger loomed large, with withered crops and scarce livestock making it a daily battle to put food on the table. Grain stores dwindled, and bitter herbs and shriveled turnips became the only sustenance between a family and starvation. In one particularly harsh winter in 1315, a medieval Englishman's harvest fell short by a third due to storms and freezing weather. Desperate, the serfs resorted to eating the straw roofs off their huts and boiling the leather from their shoes, all while still forced to labor for their lofty lords. Malnutrition weakened their bodies' defenses against winter maladies, turning the common cold into a life-threatening pneumonia or bronchitis. Influenza swept through villages like a scythe, claiming the lives of young and old alike as they shivered in their shabby shelters. With teeth chattering, medieval folk huddled together against the chill, seeking refuge in the relative warmth of shuttered houses. However, this close-quarters coziness came at a cost. The stale, smoky air, filled with the odor of unwashed bodies, festering chamber pots, and dirty rushes, was a breeding ground for disease. In one 14th-century Suffolk household, 13 family members, from grandparents to babies in arms, along with their scrawny chickens and mangy dogs, huddled together in a single tiny smokehouse throughout the winter. It's incredible that any emerged alive come spring. Sickness wasn't the only danger lurking in the long, dark nights. Fires were a constant threat in densely packed wooden cities and towns. A single misdirected spark could swiftly escalate into a furious blaze, greedily consuming tightly clustered buildings and snuffing out lives. The Great Fire of London in 1212 began on a cold November night, rapidly spreading through the city's cramped lanes while water froze in the pipes. An estimated 3,000 huddling Londoners perished in the flames, and many more were left homeless in winter's icy grip. Travel became especially perilous during these frigid months. Roads transformed into muddy quagmires, while blizzards obscured the way with blinding flurries. With daylight scarce, travelers risked becoming disoriented and losing their way, stumbling from the path into a frozen grave. In 1311, the English Queen Isabella embarked on a journey from Canterbury to London as the winter twilight deepened on the shortened day. Her party lost their way and wandered helplessly until the early hours, while the pregnant queen wept copiously in fear and exhaustion. Winter's onslaught was no less punishing for working animals. Horses and oxen grew gaunt and weak on limited winter feed. Their labored breaths smoked in the chilly air as they hauled logs and packs through knee-deep snow. Frostbite blackened their extremities, and ice cracked their hooves and wheel spokes alike. Yet, even in the bleak depths of winter, medieval people found moments of light. The Feast of St. Stephen, or Boxing Day as we know it today, was a time of charity and goodwill. Alms boxes in churches overflowed with offerings for the poor, while lords provided hearty meals to their cold and hungry tenants. The Lord of Misrule tradition brought a spark of subversive festivity to the darkest days. A lowly peasant jester or deacon would be crowned king and preside over merry revels marked by drunkenness, role reversals, and mischief. This temporary upending of the established order offered a glimmer of hope. Despite the privations and dangers posed by medieval winters, hope endured, etched in frosty breaths and undoubtedly expressed as fervent prayers. Hope that the weak and ailing would survive, that food would last until spring, and that light and warmth would conquer the constricting cold once more. So this winter, when you grumble about shoveling the driveway, curse at the thermostat, or get chilled waiting for the bus, spare a thought for those who came before us. Our medieval ancestors faced the Herculean task of surviving winter after winter with few of the comforts we take for granted. Their quiet courage in the face of winter's cruelty is perhaps the greatest lesson they have to teach us. Though we may never know most of their names or stories, we can appreciate the magnitude of their struggles and find inspiration in their endurance that saw them through to brighter days. The bitter frost continued its icy reign, transforming the landscape into a crystalline wonderland that would be picturesque, if not for the immense hardship it inflicted on the inhabitants of the land. The snow fell ceaselessly from the ash-grey sky, blanketing the countryside in a suffocating white shroud. Icicles hung like glittering daggers from the eaves of peasant hovels and grand manors alike. The hearths that burned day and night offered only a fleeting respite from the penetrating chill. Smoke from the precious flames stung watering eyes and choked lungs in the close-knit air of Whalley and Daub huts. There, huddled bodies crammed together for warmth. Humans and livestock alike were enveloped in the pungent aroma of dung and unwashed flesh, creating a uniquely medieval winter perfume. However, even this dubious comfort was a luxury beyond the reach of many. Scarcity of food stores stretched perilously thin, and persistent hunger gnawed at the bellies of the impoverished. Many subsisted on little more than coarse bread and thin gruel, praying for survival until the arrival of spring. The spectre of famine loomed over every home, from humble peasants to high-ranking nobles. No one, not even those who wore crowns, could escape winter's deadly grip. In draughty stone castles that seemed to inhale the cold and exhale an unrelenting damp, rulers shivered beneath mountains of furs. Royal households required vast amounts of firewood and preened to endure the long winter months. Woe to the kingdom whose sovereign failed to plan ahead. One chilling account recounts the demise of a medieval Bohemian princess from the cold in her bedchamber, a stark reminder that wealth and status offered only partial protection from the elements. For peasant families, the loss of a loved one to winter's icy scythe was a cruel and predictable occurrence. Disease further exacerbated the season's prodigious death toll. Agars and fevers spread rapidly through communities weakened by malnutrition and cramped living conditions. The stale, smoky air of hovels and the ubiquitous filth made the lungs more susceptible to infection. Medieval physicians, whose treatments were often rooted in superstition rather than science, were powerless to offer relief. The treacherous roads covered in snowdrifts and black ice compounded the winter's woes. Only the desperate or the foolhardy ventured far from the meager comfort of their homes during the darkest months. Travel for any distance was an ordeal fraught with peril. Peddlers' carts remained idle, depriving isolated villages of essential goods. Tithes and taxes went uncollected, causing vexation among local lords and clergy. And woe to the army that had to embark on a campaign over snow-choked roads. Their supply lines stretched and frayed under the frigid weather. The winter of 1407 witnessed one of the Middle Ages' most astonishing military feats. Born out of this brutal necessity for wintry warfare, the redoubtable Welsh rebel leader, Owain Glyndwr, faced off against the superior forces of future King Henry V in the high mountain passes. Glyndwr's men, accustomed to harsh conditions, lured the English into a trap amidst the blinding blizzard. Unfortunate in their heavy armor, the English ranks broke and fled, many perishing from exposure. Glyndwr's stunning victory, won as much by the winter as by Welsh martial prowess, lives on in legend to this day. Medieval Europe's winters were often marked by devastating famines that claimed countless lives. When the cold lingered and spring planting was delayed, food shortages quickly followed. The infamous Great Famine of 1315 to 1317 was triggered by an unusually wet and chilly spring that rotted seedlings in the ground. Subsequent crop failures over the next 2 years plunged much of the continent into starvation. In England, the price of bread skyrocketed to 20 times the normal cost. The poor resorted to eating grass, roots, even the bark off trees. Desperate bands of scavengers dug up graves to cannibalize the dead. It's estimated that 10 to 25% of the population of cities like Epes and Bruges in modern-day Belgium perished. In the French town of Trèves, a citizen wrote in his diary that the poor were eating dogs, horses, and other unclean things. The misery was compounded by crime and disease, as malnourished citizens turned to theft and violence to survive. One heart-rending account from the St. Mary's Abbey Chronicles relates the fate of a starving woman imprisoned for stealing a loaf of bread. The woman, pregnant and starving, was refused bread by the baker, so she stole a loaf and was caught. The judges refused to pardon her, and she was hanged. As she succumbed to death, the infant fell from her womb before the eyes of the people. The child lay bloody and screaming on the ground, but no one dared to touch or rescue it. The baby soon succumbed to its injuries and died where it had fallen. The famine finally eased in 1318 when the weather turned favorable again and crops began to grow. However, the specter of starvation continued to haunt the land every winter, ready to reap a grim harvest at the slightest adversity. For medieval people, winter was always a time of profound unease, if not outright terror, as they fervently prayed that their meager food stores would last until spring. Malnutrition weakened the populace, leaving them vulnerable to disease. The close and unsanitary living conditions of winter led to frequent outbreaks of infections such as influenza, dysentery, and pneumonia. Respiratory illnesses in particular took a heavy toll, spreading rapidly through coughing in stale, smoky air as people huddled around fires. Even a simple winter cold could quickly turn deadly in the Middle Ages. Even the doctors of the era were of limited help, relying on dubious treatments like bleeding and purging with laxatives to restore the balance of a patient's humors. The Emperor Charlemagne allegedly died of purpura in the bitter winter of 814 after his doctors treated him with pus and unction to no avail. Many historians believe that the Black Death of the 14th century spread so rapidly because malnourished citizens packed together in winter quarters had little resistance to the disease. The 1348 to 1349 outbreak resulted in the staggering loss of 30 to 60% of Europe's population. One poignant account comes from Pistoia, Italy, where a man named Sir Luca wrote to his brother Franceschino describing the devastation. He expressed his deep sorrow and difficulty in writing as the situation worsened rapidly. Many people had died, and many more were dying. Shops were closed, taverns deserted, and one could pass down streets without encountering a soul. Wails of grief echoed from houses where death had struck, and the stench of rot rose from mass graves. I fear our city may soon be devoid of life entirely. I implore you to remain where you are and offer us your unwavering prayers. During the plague's relentless rage, entire villages were annihilated. The suffering was further exacerbated by the trauma of hastily conducted mass burials in freezing ground and the expulsion of the sick to die alone in the snow, fearing the spread of contagion. The devastating losses of the Black Death left deep psychological scars and forever altered the medieval world. Winter was an especially dreaded time for the elderly, young children, and expectant mothers. Without the benefits of modern medicine, these vulnerable populations frequently succumbed to cold, disease, or malnutrition. It is estimated that in some medieval societies, up to 20 to 30% of infants died within their first year of life, many during the harsh winter months. Complications of pregnancy and childbirth, exacerbated by poor diet and chilly conditions, claimed the lives of countless mothers and babies. The perils of winter childbirth are vividly illustrated by the tragic tale of Matilda, the 12-year-old daughter of King Henry I of England. In the winter of 1120, Matilda was aboard a ship called the White Ship, sailing from France to England. The ship struck a rock and swiftly sank, plunging Matilda and hundreds of other passengers into the frigid waters of the English Channel. Matilda narrowly escaped drowning by boarding a small rescue boat, but then cried out for her half-brother William, who was still in the water. When the boat returned to retrieve William, so many desperate individuals attempted to climb aboard that it capsized, sending Matilda back into the cold waves. The king's young daughter, pregnant with her first child, perished along with the rest. Her grief-stricken father reportedly fainted dead away upon hearing the news and never smiled again for the rest of his life. The very old and very young were always in peril during the bleak winters of the Middle Ages. If they managed to survive disease and starvation, they still faced the risk of freezing to death in their sleep. The medieval poem Sir Gawain and the Green Knight vividly describes the elderly King Arthur shivering beneath his robes in a draughty castle hall, his teeth chattering as he spoke. Without the insulating ice caps and glaciers we have today, winters in the Middle Ages were characterized by raging snowstorms and devastating floods. In 1216, King John of England allegedly lost the crown jewels while crossing a marshy area in East Anglia called the Wash. Fleeing enemies rebelling against his rule, John's baggage train was engulfed by a surging high tide, whipped up by fierce gales. The king allegedly escaped by the skin of his teeth, but his treasure, including priceless jeweled crowns and scepters, vanished into the churning waters, never to be found. John died of dissension a few days later, a broken man. Some historians believe the loss of the crown jewels was the final blow that led to his demise. Winter storms often wreaked havoc on coastal communities, battered by hurricane-force winds and massive waves. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records a terrible flood that struck England in 1099. On St. Martin's Day, the 11th of November, a great sea flood swept through the length of the land, overrunning it so far that no man could remember it ever happening before. It drowned many towns and countless people. Another North Sea flood on January 16, 1219, completely submerged the low-lying Netherlands, resulting in the deaths of over 50,000 people. In an era devoid of early warning systems or emergency shelters, the population was entirely at the mercy of the elements. All medieval folk could do was pray for deliverance as icy floodwaters rose, and the wind howled like the very hounds of hell outside their fragile homes. Harsh winters also led to an increase in fires as people resorted to desperate measures to stay warm. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle again provides a chilling account of a deadly London blaze in 1132. A dreadful fire erupted on London Bridge, spreading rapidly and consuming a significant portion of the city. The principal church of St. Paul and the Cathedral of Canterbury, among many other churches and houses, were among the structures destroyed. The force of the wind and the intensity of the flames propelled burning rafters and sheets of lead from the rooftops, traveling extraordinary distances. Given the prevalence of timber-framed buildings and their close proximity, medieval cities were inherently susceptible to such devastating fires. A stray spark or overturned candle could ignite an uncontrollable inferno, especially when gale-force winter winds intensified the flames. Amidst the chaos, people fled through narrow, twisting streets, leaving behind their homes, often with little more than the clothes on their backs. Tragic stories abound of families separated, children trampled, and individuals trapped and burned alive. With the limited firefighting technology of the era, citizens were left with only the option of throwing buckets of water or snow onto the flames and praying for a favorable wind shift to prevent the entire city from burning down. The devastation could be catastrophic, leaving thousands homeless and destitute during the harsh winter months. However, perhaps the most formidable threat of medieval winter was not the result of blizzards, floods, or conflagrations. Sometimes the simple, inescapable, and life-draining cold was enough to cause immense suffering. In our modern world, where central heating and thermal fabrics provide warmth, it's difficult to comprehend the bone-chilling dampness and perpetual darkness of winter in the Middle Ages. With only smoky fires and piles of furs to ward off the chill, the cold seeped deep into the bones of medieval people. Arthritis and rheumatism became common afflictions, their pain intensifying with each passing year. Extremities gradually went numb, then succumbed to frostbite. Pneumonia and influenza spread rapidly in close quarters, further exacerbating the cold's effects. The cold seemed to penetrate the very soul, sapping all energy and vitality. The 6th century British monk Gilders paints a bleak picture in his work on the decline of Britain. The nights are long and dark, the days dreary and cold, the biting air and icy blasts cut to the bone, and everything is blanketed in snow and frost. It's a time of immense suffering for both humans and animals. When the earth seems dead and frozen, trapped in the clutches of a frigid hell, winter is especially dreadful for the elderly and frail. They feel hopeless that the warmth will ever return. People pile on every piece of clothing and huddle together for warmth, but the cold still seeps in. Fires sputter and die in the damp, leaving only plumes of acrid smoke that sting the eyes and choke the throat. Coughs and sniffles echo in the darkness, interspersed with the groans of the sick and dying. The cold keeps its icy grip round the clock, turning exhalations into frost and numbing limbs. It seems to reach icy fingers into the chest, squeezing the breath and congealing the blood. Even the young and healthy move as if through deep water, sluggish and yielding. There's no escaping winter's clutches in the Middle Ages. No Florida vacations or cozy electric blankets to ease the discomfort. The cold is a constant, merciless companion, draining precious energy needed for survival. It's no wonder the medieval world measured time not in months or years, but in how many winters one managed to endure. To make it through to another spring was a triumph, one that grew increasingly difficult with each passing season. Yet, despite the brutal conditions, rampant disease, gnawing hunger, and life-stealing cold, the people of the Middle Ages persevered. Year after year, winter after merciless winter, they shouldered on, fortified only by their indomitable spirits. When the last meager food supplies dwindled, they tightened their belts even further. When the fire burned down to embers, they drew another tattered blanket close. When the oppressive darkness enveloped them from all directions, they huddled together, whispering tales of brighter days yet to come. A poignant passage in the 14th century English poem Piers Plowman encapsulates the sheer resilience of the medieval spirit. Despite enduring hardships, including winter's relentless grip, frost, snow, sleet, and hail, they believed that all would pass and peace would prevail. Hope would triumph, unwavering and eternal. Even in the bleakest depths of winter, medieval folk discovered small joys and moments of grace. Neighbors shared their meager resources with those in greater need. Amidst the cold and darkness, people gathered to sing and pray. At night, some claimed to hear the voices of angels in the howling winds, promising the return of warmth and light. Thus, the people of the Middle Ages clung to hope, fiercely clung to life, and fixed their gaze on the distant horizon where spring awaited. They were certain that winter, no matter how brutal and relentless, was merely a temporary state. The sun would rise again, the snows would melt, and the world would be reborn, as vibrant and glorious as if winter had never touched it. All they had to do was endure, and endure they did, their strength forged in the very ice and stone of the season. The winters of the Middle Ages were brutal, merciless, and seemingly endless, bringing hunger, disease, destruction, and death. Yet they also revealed the best in the human spirit, an unyielding will to survive, a steadfast hold on hope, and a profound sense of compassion and kindness. The medieval world emerged from winter's icy crucible, stronger, wiser, and deeply appreciative of the cyclical nature of the seasons. Perhaps we can draw a lesson from our medieval forebears as we grumble about scraping a few inches of frost from our windshields. For them, winter was a matter of life and death, a season to be endured with grit and unwavering resolve. And endure they did, passing down to us their tales of winter's fury and the indomitable spirit of humanity. The people of the Middle Ages faced the icy grip of winter head-on. They endured floods, famines, blizzards, and the darkest nights, burying their dead in frozen ground and waking to the groans of the starving. Yet through it all, they clung to the promise of spring. If they could endure winter after winter with little more than faith and furs, then surely we too can find the strength to face our own challenges, knowing that the thaw will return and light will prevail. Though the brutal winters of the medieval world may be a distant memory, their lessons resonate through the ages, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. So, let us walk in the footsteps of our ancestors and meet winter's chill with courage, compassion, and unwavering hope. For if they could brave the darkest season with unyielding resolve, then so too can we. Winter is coming, but as the medieval world understood so well, spring is never far behind. As the chilling winds howled across the frozen landscape, medieval people gathered around the flickering light of the hearth fire. Huddled together for precious warmth, they shared stories of winters past, those harsh and unforgiving seasons that tested the mettle of even the most resilient souls. In humble cottages and grand manor houses alike, the biting cold of winter knew no bounds. Draughty shutters and thin thatched roofs offered scant protection against the relentless cold. From peasants to princes, everyone felt the sting of Jack Frost nipping at their noses and numbing their extremities. But some were fortunate enough to have a roaring hearth around which to gather. The crackling flames and the aroma of smoke provided small comfort against winter's onslaught. In the grand castles of the highborn, the great hall fireplaces consumed vast amounts of wood, attended by shivering servants whose labor never ceased. Even the mightiest noble shivered to venture beyond the fire's warmth, for winter's chill had a way of penetrating even the thickest stone walls and richest furs. For those of lower birth, the season brought an especially harsh and arduous struggle for survival. Their rough-hewn hovels offered precious little in the way of creature comforts. Meager rations of peat or wood scavenged from the forest barely sustained the spluttering hearth. Families crammed together in squalid quarters, sharing body heat and breathing air thick with smoke and the pungent stench of unwashed humanity. It was a bleak existence, to be sure, yet even in the face of such privations there were moments of cheer to be found. The glow of communal fires in the village square drew people out of their hovels, if only for a brief respite. Gathered around the leaping flames, neighbors exchanged jests and jibes, stories and songs. For a fleeting time, the cruel realities of winter seemed distant indeed. Young lovers stole secret kisses, their ardor undimmed by the cold. Children shrieked with delight as they scampered and slid across frozen ponds. Even the elderly felt the weight of their years lift for a spell, transported back to the carefree winters of their youth. Such interludes of merriment were all the more precious for their rarity. Winter's onslaught was relentless and unforgiving. Thoughts soon turned to empty bellies and the gnawing hunger that was the constant companion of the poor. Dreams of spring's bounty seemed a cruel mockery as fields lay barren beneath a blanket of snow. The spectre of famine loomed large in these lean times. A failed harvest could spell doom for entire villages. Many a mother watched in anguish as her child's cheeks grew gaunt and their eyes dulled with the hollow stare of starvation. The cruel calculus of scarcity bred a special kind of desperation. Tales abounded of the depraved lengths to which some would go to satisfy their hunger, unnatural acts that haunted the nightmares of pious people. Hunger was not the only scourge that plagued the land. Winter's chilling breath brought forth a host of maladies that preyed upon the weakened populace. The hacking cough of pneumonia echoed through many a hovel as loved ones watched helplessly. The pox and flux raged unchecked, decimating entire families. The very old and very young were especially vulnerable, their frail bodies ill-equipped to withstand winter's ravages. Perhaps the greatest cruelty was reserved for those forced to venture out into the teeth of winter's fury. Travelers risked their lives and limbs on treacherous, icy roads. many of whom met their doom. Swallowed up by swirling blizzards or plummeting into deep snowdrifts, their frozen corpses would not be discovered until the spring thaw, a grim reminder of winter's lethal power. Even the valiant knights, those stout warriors of the realm, were not immune to winter's depredations. Clad in their heavy armor, they became easy prey to the bone-chilling cold that crept into every rivet. Numb hands, made clumsy by frozen gauntlets, fumbled with their swords and shields. Once mighty charges floundered in the deep snowdrifts as icicles formed on their heaving flanks. Great and small alike cursed the name of winter. In the halls of power, the crown weighed heavily on royal brows, furrowed with care. For even a monarch could not reverse the inexorable turn of the seasons. The cost of keeping the court supplied with provisions and firewood was staggering, and royal treasuries groaned beneath the strain. Grasping merchants reaped handsome profits from the king's lares. But for all the miseries it engendered, winter's reign was not eternal. Even in the depths of icy despair, people clung to the promise of spring's sweet renewal. The joyous feast of Stephen offered a welcome reprieve from winter's woes. For a single tumultuous day, the world was turned upside down as a humble peasant ascended to the throne of chaos. Drunken revelry and boisterous songs lifted spirits and lightened hearts. Laughter, the balm for weary souls, reverberated through the frost-bitten land. Gradually, winter's icy grip began to loosen. Icicles dripped from the eaves as the sun's gentle rays worked their subtle magic. Snowdrops and crocuses emerged from the softening earth, delicate harbingers of winter's retreat. The land stirred with newfound life, shaking off the torpid slumber of the frozen months. Hearts soared and voices rose in joyous celebration. The Feast of the Plough marked the triumphant return of spring's verdant splendor. Sleek oxen pulled gleaming plowshares through rich, dark earth as the cycle of planting and renewal began anew. The lean times of winter faded into memory as fields rippled with the green and golden bounty of the land. Looking back across the centuries, we are filled with awe at the fortitude of our medieval forebears. Year after year, they endured winter's harsh realities with a stoicism born of necessity. Their unwavering spirit and unbreakable bonds of community were the key to their survival. In the face of unimaginable hardship, they found pockets of hope and moments of shared humanity. So, the next time we grumble about the inconvenience of a delayed flight or the indignity of slushy streets, let us pause and reflect. Our modern winter woes are but a mere shadow of what once was. In the grand tapestry of human history, the icy trials of the Middle Ages stand as a testament to our species' remarkable resilience and the preciousness of a warm hearth and a full belly. As we drift off to slumber, let us spare a thought for those who came before us. In our dreams, perhaps we will catch a glimpse of their world, a harsher and crueler place than our own, yet one in which the indomitable human spirit shone even brighter against the backdrop of darkness. Good night, and may you dream of gentle spring breezes. As the bitter chill of winter descended upon the weary lands of medieval Europe, the poor peasants, who struggled to make ends meet, felt the warmth and light retreat from the world. They were replaced by a deep, aching cold that penetrated to their bones. With little more than rags on their backs and scant food in their bellies, they shivered and suffered in their draughty hovels as the cruel winds howled just beyond their walls. The fortunate few with fireplaces and stores of wood could huddle together for warmth in the flickering glow. But for most, the only comfort was the shared body heat of family and livestock packed in close quarters, the fetid stench of unwashed bodies mingling with the steam of cattle breath. One can only imagine the coughs, fevers, and agonizing aches that plagued them in the damp and crowded squalor. It's a wonder any emerged alive on the other side of winter's interminable reign. Even the highest-born nobles, for all their thick furs and grand feasts, were not immune to the icy grasp of the season. Great medieval castles, with their soaring stone walls and cavernous halls, became like vast refrigerators in wintertime. The chills seeped up from the floors and down from the ceilings until they saturated the very air, defying even the mightiest of blazing hearths to banish it. There are tales of royal winter woes that make one shudder in sympathy. In the 15th century, Queen Elizabeth Woodville, consort of King Edward IV of England, was said to have actually frozen to death in her own chambers on an unusually frigid night. While records are murky and much embellished, one account claims that despite being swaddled in heavy robes and furs, the poor woman succumbed to the deep cold and was found in the morning frozen stiff as a board. Whether the story is true or not, it certainly illustrates the perilous nature of winter for even the most privileged. Kings and queens, shielded from the harsh hunger and squalid conditions of their subjects, found solace in the season's hazards. After all, they could not control the elements nor survive without air. Even the most opulent medieval bedchambers succumbed to the biting chill. As days shortened and nights grew darker and colder, medieval society braced itself for winter's relentless onslaught. From the lowest coffers to the loftiest lords, a sense of grim endurance settled upon the populace, a realization that survival depended solely on enduring the season. Stores of grains and salted meats were meticulously checked and rechecked. Every scrap of wood and kindling was jealously hoarded, and heavy woolen garments donned stoically in anticipation. The only glimmer of levity and hope amidst this bleak affair emerged with the Christmas festivities surrounding the feast of St. Stephen on December 26th. For a few joyous days, the customary social order was gleefully disrupted as a lord of misrule was chosen from among the peasants to preside over a grand array of feasts, dances, games, and general merriment. With bellies full of ale and wine, faces flushed from the crowd's embrace and the exertion of genuine joy, the common folk could momentarily forget the long privations of winter and revel in the joys of life and community. One can envision the scenes of boisterous celebration erupting in halls and public squares across the land. The thunderous laughter, the wheezing of reed pipes and fiddles as people danced in a vibrant kaleidoscope of color and mirth. For once, the boundaries between serf and nobleman blurred, the usual lines of class and station erased in the spirit of goodwill and camaraderie. The lord of misrule, perhaps a young, enthusiastic peasant lad with starry eyes, issued grandiose proclamations and absurd decrees to the delight of all. It must have been an intoxicating experience, a burst of misrule and satiation amidst the bleakness. But, as with all things, the festive season was merely a temporary respite, the eye of the storm. As the Ulf log burned down to embers and the last bowl was drained, the people returned to their hearths, and the piercing cold darkness once again descended. The joyous celebration of St. Stephen's Day and the brief respite of the Lord of Mrs. Rule were replaced once more by the grim reality of survival as winter tightened its grip. For the next interminable stretch of months, time seemed to slow to a frigid crawl. With the land frozen and unworkable, there was little for the rural peasantry to do but huddle together and pray for deliverance. The shortening days and lengthening nights stretched out like a vast chasm from which there was no escape. Huddled together in their crude shelters against the biting cold, they must have despairing of ever again feeling the warm embrace of spring's breath upon their faces. But even the cruelest winter cannot last forever. Indeed, the first green shoots of new life were already straining upwards beneath the frozen ground, biding their time. For those who endured, who clung to hope and to each other through the darkest days and coldest nights, the thaw would come again. The sun would return to the sky, the blood would quicken in the veins, and the world would slowly shed its greys and whites for a vibrant riot of color. On Plough Monday, just after Epiphany, the land could once again be tilled, and the great wheel of the agricultural year would resume its motion. The people would emerge blinking into the pale but gathering light of spring, leaner and deeply tired, but alive and grateful for it. Fields would be furrowed, seeds planted, flocks driven out to graze on fresh grass, and the entire merry dance of life would begin anew. But that was yet to come. For now, the cruel heart of winter beat on, and the people of the Middle Ages steeled themselves once more to weather its icy reign. They found solace in their rough woolen cloaks, smoky hovels, and the meagre food they had diligently stored, but most importantly, they drew strength from each other. In a world plagued by hardship and peril, where the very season seemed determined to crush their very existence, they endured as they always had together, lords and peasants, young and old, shivering and hopeful beneath the same bleak winter sky, waiting for the spring that would eventually arrive. They huddled together in the darkness and cold, listening to the mournful howl of the wind and the groaning of the ice. They spun tales and wove dreams to pass the long winter nights. Perhaps they imagined a future where winters were kinder, hearths warmer, and bellies fuller. A world that their shivering hands and frozen bones could build for future generations, or perhaps they simply clung to the faintest glimmer of light and hoped they could muster in the moment, knowing that even the longest winter must eventually yield to spring. In the face of such brutal conditions, the strength of the human spirit to endure and hold on to faith in brighter days ahead is truly remarkable. It's hard not to feel a surge of admiration for our medieval forebears who faced each bitter winter as an indomitable foe and emerged year after year to greet the spring on the other side. Let us then raise our hats to those long-ago lords and peasants who endured immense suffering and yet persevered even more. In our modern world of central heating and on-demand grocery deliveries, it's easy to forget the hardships they faced as a matter of course. But as we drift off to sleep in our warm beds, perhaps we can spare a thought for those huddled medieval masses and marvel at the strength that carried them through winter after winter, waiting for the light's return. In a world that is often cold and dark, such enduring hope and resilience is a fire that cannot be extinguished, burning brightly from their distant hovels to our own night-swaddled rooms. May we keep that flame alive in our hearts, come what winter may. As the long winter months dragged on, medieval folk eagerly anticipated any opportunity to lift their spirits and foster a sense of community and goodwill amidst the hardships. One such beacon of hope was the Feast of St. Stephen, celebrated annually on December 26th. Although the origins of this midwinter celebration are somewhat unclear, by the Middle Ages it had become a cherished tradition across much of Europe. After the solemn religious observances of Christmas Day, St. Stephen's Day was a time for merrymaking, feasting, and the playful reversal of social roles. Central to the festivities was the custom of misrule, where a peasant or commoner would be appointed lord of misrule for the day and granted the power to command their social superiors. This light-hearted upending of the status quo provided a much-needed release valve for the rigid class tensions that typically dominated medieval life. The Lord of Misrule presided over a day of revelry, leading boisterous processions through the streets, initiating mischievous pranks, and decreeing that everyone, from lords to labourers, should make merry together. Professional entertainers like minstrels, jugglers, and jesters would perform their trades, while games of chance and skill kept the crowds entertained. Bawdy comedic sketches called mummers' plays were performed, reenacting tales from legend and folklore in exaggerated strokes. Mock jousts and farcical court proceedings elicited hearty laughter, providing a welcome respite from the grim realities of winter life. Of course, no medieval celebration was complete without a hearty feast. On St. Stephen's Day, the Lord of Misrule could insist that the wealthy provide food and drink for the entire community. This charitable gesture fostered goodwill and fellowship among all. Roasted meats were the centerpiece of the feast, with geese, capons, and the traditional roast boar's head paraded in with great fanfare. Minced meat pies, heavy with dried fruit and spices, offered a sweet treat, while the wassail bowl flowed freely. The warm spiced cider bolstered everyone's spirits. One could almost hear the laughter and lively chatter ringing through the halls, rising above the blustery winter winds outside. For one brief shining day, the hardships of winter faded into the background, as the community came together in a spirit of joy and camaraderie. As the feast concluded and the revelers dispersed back to their hearths, they carried the warmth of the festivities with them like a flicker of cheerful firelight in the dark. The knowledge that they had friends and neighbors to rely on, that they could find moments of laughter and levity even in the bleakest times, surely helped boost their spirits for the hard days still ahead. And somehow, the winter's icy grip seemed a bit less harsh, the howling winds a bit more bearable when one had a belly full of good food and a heart full of fellowship. The Feast of St. Stephen was a timely reminder that even the deepest darkness of winter would eventually yield to the first hopeful stirrings of spring. Those fragile shoots of new life began to tentatively emerge as the winter's snow receded and the frozen ground began to thaw across the countryside. Watchful eyes eagerly scanned for the appearance of snowdrops, those valiant little flowers that poked their fresh green stalks and delicate white blooms through the melting slush. Their arrival heralded that the long night of winter was finally ending and the season of rebirth was approaching. In villages everywhere, weary folk rejoiced to see the first hints of color and vitality return to a landscape that had been shrouded in icy white stillness for so many months. With a newfound spring in their steps, medieval peasants returned to the rhythms of the agricultural year, and the great wheel of life began to turn once more. Hibernating livestock were led out to the pastures that were beginning to green again. The farmer, eager to work the softening earth, hitched his team to the plough. The first Monday after Epiphany, which fell in January, came to be known as Plough Monday for this very reason. It marked the moment when the land could be worked again after the winter freeze, ushering in the labours of a new farming season. Ploughs that had been stored away for the winter months were hauled out and blessed in joyful Plough Monday processions through the fields. Ploughmen went from door to door collecting food, ale, and small coins, all in anticipation of the work and harvest to come. One can imagine a weather-beaten village huddled around their communal plot, their faces turned gratefully towards a sky that brightened into a paler shade of blue. With hoes and digging sticks in hand, they prepared to sink the first hopeful seeds into the receptive soil, an act of faith that spring would conquer winter in due time. Among them was the wizarded old grandmother, a child clutching each gnarled hand as she showed them how to plant the peas, just as her own grandmother had once taught her many long springs ago. The smaller child giggled with delight as a rotund earthworm wriggled free from the dirt, while the older solemnly pushed each seed into its waiting hollow. It was moments like these where knowledge passed from old to young and growth bloomed anew, making all the privations of winter worthwhile. The warm smile crinkling the grandmother's eyes held the promise that the dark days had passed and life was returning to the land once more. As the seeds nestled into their earthen beds and the strengthening sun began to coax green shoots from the ground, the spectre of winter finally released its icy hold and slid away. The pall of cold and death that had hung for so long, eased by a spirit of hope and renewal, carried on spring's gentle breezes. Looking back from our modern perspective, it's humbling to consider the incredible strength and resilience it must have taken to endure the harsh medieval winters year after year. Without the conveniences and comforts we often take for granted, their survival through to spring was an extraordinary feat. Yet, amidst unimaginable hardship, medieval people managed to find reasons for hope, joy, and celebration. The warmth of community, the promise of spring, the restorative power of laughter and fellowship, these were the guiding lights that helped them navigate winter's darkest days. Perhaps as we snuggle deeper under our cozy comforters, insulated from the cold, we can spare a thought for our long-ago ancestors. The next time the winter wind rattles our windows and we grumble at the chill, we might pause and smile, recognizing that our winter woes lightly pale in comparison to what they faced repeatedly, century after century. As we drift off to sleep, we can carry the knowledge that we too possess an ember of that same indomitable summer that burned in the hearts of medieval people. The assurance that spring always returns and life goes on, regardless of how dark the winter night, provides us with comfort. So, as the last light fades and the wind whispers a lullaby against the pane, I invite you to let your imagination wander back through the ages and walk alongside those distant ancestors as they triumphed over winter's icy rain. May their courage and indomitable spirit inspire your dreams tonight. If this journey through history has piqued your curiosity, I encourage you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are always more captivating tales to lull you into restful slumber. Until next time, my friends, sleep well and dream of cozy hearths and fresh green shoots emerging beneath the snow. Good night.